What if the heaviest burden in your life is something Jesus never asked you to carry? You may have carried it for so long that you no longer recognize its weight. An old betrayal, guilt from the past, responsibility for someone else's choices, or a wound you keep reopening in your mind. You pray for freedom, yet part of you is still holding tightly to what happened. And there is a reason this teaching can sound different when we return to the Aramaic world behind the words of Jesus. The English word forgive often sounds like an obligation. Forgive, move on, forget. But the ancient Aramaic root, SHBAQ, opens a much more physical image to leave. Release, let go, allow something to depart. And that distinction changes the question completely. What if forgiveness is not asking you to approve what happened, but to stop carrying what happened? In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus connects forgiveness with the language of debts, revealing something extraordinary about what the heart continues to hold. Because some debts are no longer financial, they have become emotional weights carried for years. Stay with me, because once you understand what SHBAQ reveals, I will show you how to recognize the burden that may never have belonged in your hands, and how to begin releasing it without denying your story, abandoning wisdom, or reopening doors that needed to remain closed. There are burdens you immediately recognize: financial pressure, responsibilities at home, uncertainty about the future, or the exhaustion of caring for people you love. But some of the heaviest burdens are invisible. Nobody sees them when you enter a room. Yet they quietly consume your strength because you have carried them for so long that they have begun to feel like part of you. Perhaps someone betrayed your trust years ago, but the conversation still happens inside your mind. Perhaps you made a mistake you sincerely regret, yet you continue punishing yourself long after you learned from it. Or perhaps you assumed responsibility for another person's happiness, choices, failures, or approval, until their burden slowly became yours. This is where a familiar teaching of Jesus deserves another look. In Matthew chapter 6, during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus teaches the prayer traditionally rendered, "Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors." We hear those words and usually interpret forgiveness primarily as a moral duty. Someone hath wronged you, therefore you should forgive. But that interpretation can leave something unresolved. What happens when your mouth says, "I forgive," while your body still tightens whenever that person's name is mentioned? What happens when you have walked away physically, but emotionally you return to the same event every night? This is where translation can veil an important dimension of the teaching. The Greek gospel tradition preserves the canonical text, but the Semitic world surrounding Jesus gives us another lens through which to hear the imagery of release. In Syriac Aramaic tradition, the root SHBAQ carries meanings associated with leaving: releasing, allowing, abandoning, and forgiving. Imagine holding a heavy rope with both hands. Someone hurt you at the other end of that rope, and you decided never to forget what happened. Years pass, your hands ache, your shoulders tighten, your strength decreases, yet you continue gripping because releasing the rope feels like allowing the other person to win. But who is carrying the weight now? This is the conflict hidden inside many invisible burdens. We confuse remembering with carrying. We confuse boundaries with resentment. We confuse responsibility with guilt. We imagine that releasing pain somehow changes the truth about what happened. It does not. You can release resentment and maintain a boundary. You can stop punishing yourself while still accepting responsibility. You can remember a lesson without rebuilding the wound every morning. That is why SHBAQ matters. It moves forgiveness away from pretending nothing happened and toward a deeper question. What are you still holding that no longer needs to be carried? And before we answer that, there is something about the original language of Jesus that makes this idea of release even more powerful. In just a moment, I will guide you through a short practice prayer centered on SHBAQ so you can experience this teaching not merely as an idea, but as an intentional act of release. Before we reach that moment, however, you need to understand why returning to the Aramaic world of Jesus can change the way familiar teachings are heard. Jesus lived in the multilingual world of first-century Judea and Galilee, where Aramaic was widely spoken alongside other languages. The Gospels themselves preserve Aramaic expressions attributed directly to him. Mark chapter 5 records, "Talitha cum," spoken when he raises Jairus' daughter, while Mark chapter 7 preserves Ephatha, spoken in the healing of a man who could not hear properly. Those moments matter because they allow us to hear traces of the linguistic environment surrounding his ministry. Yet the spiritual significance is not that Aramaic syllables function as magical sounds. Words carry intention because they carry meaning, memory, imagery, and direction. Pronouncing a meaningful word deliberately can focus the heart on the action that the word represents, and the action behind SHBAQ is powerful. Release. Picture yourself walking 4 miles carrying a stone. At first, you know it is heavy. After several hours, however, you begin adjusting your entire body around it. Eventually, you become so accustomed to the weight that you stop asking why you are still carrying it. That stone may be an old betrayal. It may be shame from a decision you made years ago. It may be resentment toward someone who never apologized. It may even be responsibility for another adult's choices, a burden you accepted because you believed love required you to carry everything. But SHBAQ introduces a different spiritual movement. Open the hand. This becomes especially meaningful beside the language of debts in Matthew 6. A debt is something kept on an account because something remains owed. Emotionally, we can do the same thing. They owe me an apology. Life owes me what I lost. I owe myself punishment. The account remains open, and every remembrance collects the debt again. Release does not mean declaring the debt imaginary. It means refusing to let the unpaid account continue owning your inner life. You can remember without living inside the memory. You can protect yourself without feeding hatred. You can acknowledge injustice without allowing it to become your identity. And you can release guilt after repentance without pretending your choices never mattered. This is the doorway SHBAQ opens. Not forgetting, but loosening the grip. If today's revelation has stirred something in your heart, don't let your journey end here. Our Aramaic Wisdom Guide was created to help you rediscover the original wisdom behind the words of Jesus. True knowledge sets us free. You'll find the link waiting for you in the comments, or simply scan the QR code on your screen to access it instantly. And the best is yet to come. In the next chapters, you'll discover what could change everything for you. But first, instead of merely understanding SHBAQ, bring this ancient image of release into the burden you have been carrying. If you can, become still for a moment and let these words become your own prayer. God, I come before you, carrying things I was never meant to hold forever. Through SHBAQ, teach my heart to release resentment, guilt, fear, and the debts I keep collecting in my mind. I do not deny what happened, and I do not abandon wisdom, but I choose to loosen my grip, take what has exhausted my spirit, and show me what is mine to learn and what is mine to release. Restore my strength, renew my peace, and teach me to walk forward lighter. Amen. Now notice what this prayer does not ask you to do. It does not ask you to erase your memory, return to an unsafe relationship, excuse injustice, or pretend that painful choices had no consequences. Instead, it separates two things we often confuse: the lesson and the burden. The lesson may need to remain. The burden does not. This distinction appears powerfully in Matthew chapter 11, where Jesus speaks to those who labor and are heavy laden and invites them to come to him for rest. The image is physical. Something has been carried long enough that the person has become exhausted beneath it. Some burdens belong to responsibility. Others belong to fear. Wisdom teaches you to distinguish them. Perhaps you need to make a financial decision, but you do not need to rehearse catastrophe every night. Perhaps you need boundaries with someone, but you do not need to continue an imaginary argument with that person every morning. Perhaps you need to acknowledge a mistake, but you do not need to sentence yourself to lifelong shame. This is where SHBAQ becomes practical. Each time the old burden returns, ask, is there an action required from me, or am I simply carrying the emotional weight again? If action is required, act with wisdom. If nothing can be changed in that moment, loosen your grip. Because freedom does not always begin when circumstances change. Sometimes freedom begins when you finally recognize that carrying yesterday one more day will not rewrite yesterday. And that realization prepares us for something even deeper. Why Jesus connected release, not only with what others owe us, but with what we believe we ourselves still owe. There is another invisible burden that can be heavier than resentment toward someone else, the debt you continue collecting from yourself. You remember what you should have done differently, the opportunity you missed, the relationship you damaged, or the season when fear controlled your decisions. The event ended, but internally, the trial never did. You became both the accused and the judge. This is why the language surrounding forgiveness is so revealing. In the prayer of Matthew chapter 6, Jesus uses the image of debt because debt creates an unfinished account. Something remains outstanding. Something still demands payment. And many people live with an invisible account against themselves. They believe that if they stop feeling guilty, they have stopped caring. If they release shame, they are excusing the mistake. So they keep paying emotionally for something they have already confessed, confronted, or tried to repair. But guilt and responsibility are not identical. Healthy responsibility says, I was wrong. What can I repair and learn? Shame says, I was wrong. Therefore, I must remain defined by what I did. One can lead toward transformation. The other can chain identity to the past. Remember Peter after denying Jesus. His failure was real. The gospel does not hide it or minimize it. Yet John chapter 21 does not show Jesus demanding that Peter spend the rest of his life proving how ashamed he was. Instead, Peter is confronted, restored, and given a direction forward. That is release with responsibility. This is another dimension through which SHBAQ can speak into daily life. Release is not refusing accountability. It is refusing to make punishment your permanent identity after accountability has done its work. Imagine opening your hand again. This time, what you are holding is not another person's offense. It is your own former self. You cannot return and become the person you were before that mistake. But you can decide what the person you are today will do with what was learned. That is where strength begins to return. The past becomes a teacher instead of a prison. The scar remains evidence that something happened, but it no longer has to remain an open wound. Perhaps you're wondering why these original teachings remained hidden for so long. That's why we created the Aramaic Wisdom Guide, because true knowledge sets us free. The link is waiting for you in the comments, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now. There is still another burden that hides more deeply because it often disguises itself as love. Carrying responsibility for what belongs to someone else. You worry about their decisions, anticipate their mistakes, try to prevent every consequence, and slowly begin living as though their future depends entirely upon your ability to control it. Perhaps this is happening inside your family. You love someone who keeps making choices you cannot understand. You have advised, prayed, helped, warned, and sometimes sacrificed your own peace trying to rescue them. Yet when nothing changes, you feel guilty, as though their struggle proves that you have failed. But love and control are not the same thing. Even Jesus allowed people to make choices. In Mark chapter 10, the rich young man approaches him sincerely, receives an invitation, and then walks away sorrowful. Jesus does not chase him down the road and force him to return. The invitation remains true, but the choice belongs to the man. There is profound freedom in understanding this. You can love someone without carrying their decisions. You can pray without trying to control the answer. You can offer wisdom without becoming responsible for whether another person accepts it. You can help without destroying yourself in the process. This is another place where SHBAQ becomes a spiritual movement of release. Sometimes what must be released is not the person but your illusion that you can control their journey. Imagine two travelers walking side by side. Each carries a backpack. Compassion may lead you to help the other traveler for a while, but if you permanently carry both backpacks, eventually neither of you learns how to walk properly. Ask yourself what belongs in your hands today. Your words belong to you. Your integrity belongs to you. Your boundaries, decisions, prayers, and actions belong to you. But another person's response does not. That distinction can return enormous strength to your life. And when you begin releasing what belongs to others, something unexpected happens. You discover how much energy was being consumed by battles you could never control. This is not indifference. It is love without possession, compassion without self-destruction, and responsibility without carrying another person's entire life. That is SHBAQ, becoming freedom. Now bring everything together. The resentment you carried because someone hurt you, the shame you carried because you hurt someone else, the responsibility you carried for choices that were never yours to make. They appear different, yet each burden has something in common. Your inner hands remained closed around something from which you could not move forward, and SHBAQ invites those hands to open. There is a beautiful image in Hebrews, chapter 12. Laying aside every weight, and running with endurance the race set before us. Notice that the passage speaks not only about sin, but also about weight. Some things may not be inherently wrong, yet they can become too heavy to carry into the next season. That old argument may be one of those weights. The need to prove yourself may be another. The expectation that everyone must understand you may be another. So may the endless attempt to rewrite a past that cannot be changed. You have limited attention, limited emotional energy, and limited hours in each day. Every burden you unnecessarily carry consumes strength that could be invested in what is still alive before you. This is why release is not weakness. Release is direction. When Jesus taught forgiveness, he was not teaching his followers to become passive before wrongdoing. Throughout the Gospels, truth, accountability, mercy, and wisdom exist together. You can forgive and still say no. You can release resentment and still remember what experience taught you. The question is no longer, did this hurt me? The question becomes, must I continue carrying its weight? There will be moments when the answer does not come instantly. Some wounds require time, prayer, wise counsel, and repeated decisions. Do not turn SHBAQ into another demand against yourself. Release can be a process. Today you may loosen one finger from the rope. Tomorrow another. What matters is that you are no longer confusing the rope with your identity. You are not created only to carry what happened. You are still capable of becoming, loving, creating, serving, learning, and walking toward what remains ahead. So, how do you carry SHBAQ beyond this video and into ordinary life? Keep the practice simple enough that you can actually remember it when the burden returns. Each morning, before reaching for everything demanding your attention, place your hands open in front of you. Take 3 slow breaths and speak SHBAQ 3 times, gently and deliberately. Let the word remind you of one movement. I release what is not mine to carry. Then identify one burden. Do not attempt to release your entire past in 60 seconds. Choose what is present today. Perhaps it is resentment towards someone, fear about tomorrow, guilt you have already confronted, or responsibility for another person's decisions. Ask yourself, is there something wise I need to do about this today? If there is, decide upon the next responsible action. If there is nothing you can do in that moment, open your hands again, and refuse to spend the entire day mentally carrying what cannot presently be changed. At night, repeat SHBAQ once more before sleep. Let it become a boundary between today's responsibilities and tomorrow's possibilities. This is not magic, and the word itself is not a supernatural mechanism. The transformation comes from repeatedly aligning your attention and choices with the spiritual principle it represents. Release what must be released, repair what can be repaired, and stop confusing suffering with faithfulness. Over time, you may begin noticing the burden sooner. The old memory returns. But instead of following it for 20 minutes, you recognize it. Fear arrives, but you ask whether action is required. Someone else's choices trouble you, but you remember where your responsibility ends. That is how an ancient word becomes a daily practice. SHBAQ. Release the debt. Release the grip. Keep the wisdom. Walk forward lighter. Before you go, if this message touched your heart or brought new understanding into your life, write the word SHBAQ in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is seeking healing and renewal. And remember, the Aramaic Wisdom Guide is always waiting for you, so you can keep rediscovering the original words of Jesus. You'll find it in the comments or by scanning the QR code on your screen. If this revelation blessed you, Please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Your support helps this ancient wisdom reach more hearts. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in freedom, and walk in the power of SHBAQ. Release what you were never meant to carry.